Please join me in welcoming Mr. Abbas Jamie.
And thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak. Yes, Paul, we were one of the multinational companies operating in South Africa. Yeah, that's another discussion we can have. Paul made mention of Saint-Pieter Blanche, and I'm not sure how many people know the history of Saint-Pieter Blanche. He was involved in the 80s in discussions, clandestine discussions with the ANC, to bring the National Party to the table, to have discussions around reconciliation. And he left the National Party, I think, in the late 80s, because he just wasn't making progress. And he became one of the big critics of the apartheid government. And yes, quite an interesting book that he's got. So we heard the numbers early on from Lynn, and the numbers were not great. We spoke about 16% black professionals registered. I speak to a lot of clients in South Africa, and my portfolio being transformation, when I walk in and start explaining what we're doing as Oricon, in many times I get the response from clients saying, since 94, it's been 13 years. How long does it take you to train an engineer? 23 years. 23 years. How long does it take you to train an engineer? In fact, it goes back pre-94. Because you could employ black people before 94 and train them up. And so as an industry, we need to seriously ask ourselves, what are we doing? What have we done over the last 20, 30 years with regard to transformation? And as engineers, we get caught up in the numbers very quickly, because that's the way we think. We are analytical animals. And so when Lynn mentions the legislative environment, we are very good at that, using the numbers. And so we can show you whatever charter number you want us to show. The response I get from a lot of clients is, I don't believe your charter. And we can show them the level 2 certificate that we've got. They just do not believe it. And again, I think the challenge for us is saying, as engineers and the built environment professionals, what is our response? And it goes to the whole systems thinking, because in the systems thinking world, we've had presentations earlier on today from an economic perspective and a political perspective. There's some other perspectives as well, the environmental, the resources, the social aspects. Because what we're dealing with is what we call in the future's world a wicked problem. It's a very complex problem. And it encompasses all of these other things that we spoke about, the politics, social, resources. And we are hitting this problem with an analytical solution. And so we start running into problems. And we'll meet procurement criteria, and government looks at the industry and says, I don't see the change, so I'll push the procurement criteria even further. And this is a back and forth with government. And this is not unique to the engineering industry, make no mistake. Across corporate South Africa, that is the state of play. However, we need to ask ourselves as an industry, can we continue down this vein? Where we have 26%, what was it, 16% of black professionals within the consulting engineering space. But the majority of black professionals feel more comfortable working for government or parastatals. Because as a country, make no mistake, we cannot continue down this path. Because it's two very different worldviews right now. And so the challenge for us as the engineering space, and what we say in Oricon, we need to move way beyond the charter. We will continue to set aggressive targets, and we will continue to meet those targets. And that needs to happen. But it's very complicated. For those people who are not in that space, and you speak to them about charters and targets, they just don't understand it. It's become an analytical thing that we work through. And so we can respond to that. What we're saying is that if we want to make a real change, we need to talk to hearts and minds. Because if we do not address the hearts and minds of people, it doesn't matter what target you put on the table. I will meet that target. And make no mistake, if you are appointing a black professional or woman professional into a position for the wrong reason, they will fail. Or they will most probably leave. And so we see as a sector that is the problem we encounter. We are very good at training our people. We have hundreds of engineers coming through our doors. Professional registration, to join a parastatal. Because they'll get the best training, as we've heard, in the private sector. And so, being this analytical animals, I think we need to ask ourselves, what tools can we use to change that mindset? Because no one else is going to do it for us. There's no one coming from outside of South Africa going to come save us. And so as engineers, I think we need to take on this responsibility of becoming more of a systems thinking type of animal. And I'm not saying we're not going to be analytical animals anymore. If you're building a bridge, you better be a good analytical animal, otherwise the bridge collapses. However, when you're addressing wicked problems, like transformation, or even the rapid urbanization on the African continent, these wicked problems, you need a different perspective. And that's where systems thinking comes in. And so what are some of the tools that we can use to, as engineers, to make us think more systemically? We're doing some interesting things around design thinking, bringing design thinking into the business to make us more of more of a systems thinker. We've introduced simple things like storytelling. And people say, what is storytelling about? But if you embrace storytelling, you listen to someone without needing to respond. Because as professionals, we'll sit in sessions like those or workshops, and someone is speaking to you, and you're listening to them with the intention of responding. Because you've got a worldview, and I need to get across my worldview, which is different to yours. And so the power of system thinking, or the power of storytelling, allows you to listen to someone purely to understand their worldview. And unfortunately, as a country, that is something we have not done. And we've got to accept that corporate South Africa is a microcosm of the broader country that we live in. And our country has two very different worldviews right now. There's a worldview from the green leafy suburbs, and there's a worldview from the townships. And they're very far apart. And we see those worldviews being played out, whether it's politics or economics. And a lot of it happening in the social media. And that is probably the worst place to dialogue, because you do not dialogue in social media or in the media in general. Because what happens in social media is you migrate to all those people that have your worldview. And on the other side is people that have a different worldview. And so in social media, you entrench your worldviews. And so South Africa moved from our apartheid state into the Rainbow Nation, Mandela, World Cup. It was fantastic. And we felt we were very exceptional as a country. We were the exception to the rule. We might have been the exception for about 4 or 5 years. But that has all changed. We're no more the exception, and no one treats us as an exception anymore. And so these things that's playing out right now in our country, whether it's radical economic transformation, or whether it's used for political purposes, is part of the global discussion around what is the new global economic system. It's a real discussion that needs to be had. And if I ask us people here in the room, as the engineering sector or the consulting engineering sector, what is our worldview on the radical economic transformation? Have we had that discussion? Make no mistake, if we do not have that discussion, someone else will be having that discussion on our behalf. And so as the engineering industry, we're saying, how do we embrace the new South Africa? And in order to embrace the new South Africa, we need to get to know the other. What we find within the engineering space, very different understandings of a future South Africa. black professionals, women professionals, still feeling very alienated in corporate South Africa and within our sector. And whether that is because of Afrikaans being spoken, or whether it's because of different cultures, but it's real. And so as engineers, again, we play a critical part in the success of our country. But we need to get it right. And it's very easy to blame government for what's going wrong right now. But within our sector, we've got to ask ourselves, how are we so far off the mark? Just from the employment equity perspective. I believe it's because we haven't had those awkward discussions. So when you start talking about white privilege, people start falling off their chair. If you start talking about colonialism, whiteness, these are the discussions that we need to embrace, and the discussions that we as South Africans need to have. As corporate South Africa, we employ thousands of people. We have them in our confines for many hours of the day. And so we need to use that space to contribute towards the social cohesion discussion in our country. And it's not easy. We all should understand the National Development Plan. It's a critical part of the future of our country, and it's shaping government's thinking right now. So again, if there's any company here that has not yet got the National Development Plan and not using the National Development Plan as your guide, you better get that quickly. And I'm not saying the National Development Plan has the answer for everything, but it is a futurist type of document about what our country can look like. And very interestingly, in the National Development Plan, it calls for private sector to come on board and support government's agenda of social cohesion. And it asks for a very simple thing. It says, take the preamble to our constitution, which is one of the best constitutions in the world, we've been told, and put that up into your lobby. I haven't seen that preamble up in one corporate that I've been to. And so we need to ask ourselves, have we embraced the new South Africa? And we need to move way beyond the charter. Because the people who's giving out the work in government does really not believe our certificates that we show them. And so we need to ask ourselves, beyond the charter, what is the culture of our businesses? And the culture does not sit in a document or on your website. The culture sits when you walk in by that building. The culture sits when someone speaks in Afrikaans in a meeting, and a white colleague will say, sorry, you cannot do that. We have black colleagues here that don't understand Afrikaans. The culture needs to be one of, if you sit in a meeting with a client and a client makes a racist remark or a sexist remark, you must be able to stand up and say, sorry, Mr. Client, my company does not support that. And the question to everyone in this room, you know your company's best. Is that the culture of our companies in South Africa right now? Because I can tell you, I speak to many black professionals, many youngsters. I'm a mentor in our company and externally with other companies as well. And many black professionals do not feel comfortable in corporate South Africa. And what we're saying is that as a country, we cannot continue down this path. We cannot have all our black professionals sitting in government and all our white professionals sitting in private sector. We are setting ourselves up for disaster. And transformation is not about replacing white people with black people. Understand that. That is not what transformation is about. We are very, I lived in apartheid and I grew up in apartheid, and I have my baggage and I need to deal with that as an individual. The Generation Z that's coming along is not interested in our history and our problems. They want the change and they want it now. How do we, as the engineering consulting sector, create a home for those new generation of youngsters that's coming through? And so the challenge, I think, for us as the engineering space is saying, we have the opportunity, we have highly qualified people in our business. Let us commit as the engineering space to say we want to make a contribution towards social cohesion in our country. And this is not about winning work. If we don't get this social cohesion right, there is no work in the future. I might sound like a doomsday, but if we continue down this separate worldviews, the future does not look great. And so the appeal is saying, from CSIS, how can CSIS play that role in creating this platform for real dialogue to take place? And how do we lead that within the engineering built environment space, and hopefully that can filter out into other professions as well. And so, Lynn mentioned I'm a futurist as well, and futurists are supposed to be very optimistic, and I'm sounding very negative right now. I'm very optimistic about our country. I think we have all the ingredients for a great country. We need to sort out the politics. December is politics. You know, and when you have these things that happen in our country, from a systems perspective, you take a step back and say, how impactful is this thing in the broader scheme of things? So would you rather have JayZ as a president or Donald Trump as a president? Right? And who's going to who's going to damage the future the most? There might not be an environment left after Trump is done with it. But ultimately, I think we've been given a fantastic opportunity. We have world-class constitution, we have economic system, a banking system that works, that it's up there with the best in the world. We have professionals that can go anywhere in the world and are well respected, well recognized. And so let us, in our small way, make the change within our areas of influence. Because we get caught up very much quickly in the negativity of what's happening in December. And that's doomsday. Just park that for 1 minute and say, how am I going to influence the people around me? And within my business, how do we make a difference? Because if we can do that, we start creating these pockets of social cohesion, and hopefully that filters from the person that you've employed into his family, into his friends. That when they stand around the braai having a joke and someone makes a racist joke, he will call it out and say, that's not acceptable. Because that needs to become the culture of who we are as an industry. So what I'd like to leave you with is that challenge as far as saying, from Oricon's side, yes, we are a multinational. We have a lot of shareholding sitting in this country of the two companies that merged with a Australian business. We committed to South Africa. We not answerable to someone offshore. And there's nowhere else for us to go. We committed to this country. We committed to making that change. And so Jacques sitting there, he drives our charters and the employment equity and the targets, and he's very good at that. But it's very separate to the stuff that I drive on transformation. The transformation stuff that I drive is around how do we change hearts and minds. And changing hearts and minds is not going to come, unfortunately, from the CEO issuing an email saying, this is our new culture. It needs to happen in your individual units, and it's a bottom-up driven process. From our side, we're happy to share the stuff that we're doing. We're getting some outcomes out of that. We're more than happy to share that with CSIS and to any other company that's wanting to hear. We think it's something we all need to do together. So thank you very much.